Naming acids. You're going to recognize something as an acid because it contains the H plus ion. Now, acids are molecular. They contain nonmetals, but when you dissolve them in water, they form the H plus ion. So that's how we're going to recognize an acid. It contains a hydrogen. It also contains a nonmetal, sometimes nonmetals, depending on the type. Okay, so there's two main types of acids that we're going to learn to name. And they are binary acids and oxyacids. Okay, binary acids contain two things because that's what binary means. And the two things is just hydrogen and a nonmetal. Oxyacids contain hydrogen, a nonmetal, and oxygen. Okay, so if it contains oxygen, it's an oxyacid, which makes sense, right? If it doesn't contain oxygen, it's a binary acid. If it is a binary acid, naming it is very easy. We just use the prefix hydro, then we fill in a blank, the suffix ic, and then we write the word acid. And the blank is the stem of the nonmetal. So the stem of the nonmetal name that's in the acid goes in this blank space here. So for example, HCl, the nonmetal is chlorine. The stem of chlorine is chlor, so it will be hydrochloric acid. Okay, let's take a look at some more. HBr, the nonmetal is bromine, and so we have the stem of bromine is brome, so hydrobromic acid. Hydrobromic acid. Now, sometimes there can be more than one hydrogen. For example, H2S is still a binary acid because it still just contains two things. And sulfur is a little bit different in that it uses two syllables in its stem. It actually uses the whole word. So even though you want to call it hydrosulfuric acid, it's not. It's hydrosulfuric acid. It uses the whole word sulfur. See, there's the word sulfur. Hydrosulfuric acid. Phosphorus also uses two syllables in its stem. So it's not hydrophosphic acid, it's hydrophosphoric acid. Again, two syllables. Okay, so binary acid, it's hydroblank ic, and the blank is the stem of the nonmetal. Okay, what about if it is an oxyacid? Okay, well, oxyacids have names that are derived from the oxyanions. Okay, and the oxyanions are things like nitrate, sulfate, chlorate, carbonate. What else? Phosphate. Okay, those are 5 oxyanions that it would be very helpful for you to memorize. If you memorize the names and formulas of these oxyanions, you can work out the names of the acids. Okay, I'll show you what I mean. Nitrate is NO3 minus. And to turn the nitrate ion into an acid, we need to add hydrogens. And remember, in an acid, hydrogen is always H+. So we need to add enough H pluses to balance the negative charge on the nitrate ion. So NO3 minus will become HNO3. We always write the hydrogen at the front of the formula in an acid. Okay, we call this nitric acid. Okay, so the nitrate ion becomes nitric acid simply by adding enough hydrogens to balance the negative charge. Let's do the same with sulfate. we need to add 2 H pluses to the sulfate ion to form the acid. So that becomes H2SO4, and the sulfate ion becomes sulfuric acid. So hopefully you're spotting the trend. Ions that end in ate form acids that end in ic. Okay? So if you memorize the names and formulas of the ions that end in ate, you can work out the names and formulas of the acids that end in ic simply by adding enough hydrogens to balance the negative charge. Okay, what about this ion, NO2 minus? Well, it's called nitrite. And if you remember, nitrate was NO3 minus. Okay, so NO3 minus is nitrate, NO2 minus is nitrite. Remember we had SO4, 2 minus was sulfate. SO3, 2 minus is sulfite. So hopefully you see this trend. Ions that end in ite have 1 oxygen less than ions that end in ate. So if you memorize the ions that end in ate, you can work out the names and formulas of the ions that end in ite simply by changing the number of oxygens. Now the other nonmetal stays the same, the charge stays the same. The only thing that changes is the number of oxygens. Okay, and the ite ions have 1 oxygen less than the ate ions. Now we can turn our ite ions into acids by adding hydrogens. And these acids are called nitrous acid and sulfurous acid, respectively. And hopefully you can see the trend. Ions that end in ite form acids that end in us. Okay, so let's review. Ions that end in ate form acids that end in ic. Ite ions have 1 oxygen less than ate ions. And ite ions form acids that end in us. Okay, maybe let's write those down. Okay, so ate ions form ic acids, and those are the endings, right? Ite ions have 1 oxygen less than ate ions. And finally, ite ions form us acids. So these 3 mantras, along with the 5 ions that end in ate, allow us to name 5 ions that end in ite, 5 ic acids, and 5 us acids. So it's kind of like memorizing 5 and getting 15 for free. Okay, so go ahead and memorize these 5 oxy ions. Again, they're nitrate, sulfate, chlorate, carbonate, and phosphate. And if you memorize these and these 3 mantras, then you're going to be able to name the ic acids, the ite ions, and the us acids.